Welcome to the Shir and Avodas HaParsha in the lovely neighborhood of Shari Chesed, Yerushalayim, in the wonderful Kehila of Ner Avram. So, there's a fascinating Midrash. It seems to be, good. We're doing the checklist. I have the little, very good. So, we have the Orei Mikla, the cities of refuge. If someone killed inadvertently, but as the Gemara in Makkos explains it, it's a certain middle range. In other words, there's what's called total onus, beyond your control. Kind of like that case I described. If someone came out of nowhere and jumped in front of your car, there was no, if you were driving responsibly and such, and there was no, that's onus. They're a person, onus rachmana patre. I mean, if it was real negligence, oh, shalom aleichem. If there was a lot of negligence, so then that's either mazid intentional or karov lemazid, close to intentional, and you don't go to the city of refuge. You go to the city of refuge when you killed inadvertently, but with a certain amount of negligence. And there's teeth to this idea of having to go to this city of refuge because in certain ways, you're able to be killed by what's called the goel hadam, by a relative or such who can kill you for what you did to their relative. Now again, there's machlokes whether the goel hadam actually should be doing this or just can do this, but the point is for him to go to the Ir Miklat for rehab. Right? He's supposed to be there. It's supposed to be something that's going to help him come back to himself, but it's also supposed to save him and help him have a future after having done something which is really terrible. So the way it's described in the Parsha, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, Daber el Bnei Yisrael v'amarta aleim, tell Bnei Yisrael, Ki atem ovrim es hayarden arza Canaan, when you cross the Yarden to go into the land of Canaan, v'hikrisem lachem orim miklat tiyena lachem. V'hikrisem, Rashi says, is an idea here of actually like dedicating, right? He says, Lashon hazmona, an idea of setting aside these cities. V'nos shama rotzeach makin nefesh bishgoga. Right, and this is where this person who killed inadvertently will go, right? And they give him miklat, they give him refuge from the goel, from any relative who might be pursuing him. V'lo yamus harotzeach, he will not die. He's protected in that city. Ad amdo l'fnei ha'edel mishpat. Again, there's two stages. After he kills till he gets his mishpat, and then he goes back. These are the Orei Miklat. That is their purpose. That's who's there. Now, the Midrash tells us the following. It starts with a pasuk from Tehillim. In other words, starts with our pasuk. It says, in Tehillim, Kaf Hei Ches, Tov v'yosher Hashem al kein yorech hatoim badorech. Hashem is good and just, and therefore, there are different ways of explaining yorech hatoim. The way the Midrash kind of here explains, he guides hatoim along the road. He guides those who sin on the road. Hashem is the More Derech. You know, when you talk about a madrich on a program, that's short for More Derech, someone who shows you the way. That's where the word comes from. So the Midrash goes on to tell us the following. Kivan she'amad Moshe v'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'ikrisem lachem orim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe, you're going to have to dedicate these cities in Eretz Yisrael. Amar Moshe, Ribono Shel Olam, zeh sheharag nefesh bishgoga batzafon ubadorom, this is not something which is a planned out trip. Someone killed inadvertently. He's in the north of Israel. He's in the south of Israel. Someone tells him, you better get to Ir Miklat quickly. Didn't have ways then. Right? How do you find the Ir Miklat? This is what Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's he going to do? Amar lo, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, and this is from another pasuk about the Ir Miklat and Sefer Devarim, Tachin lecha haderech. Prepare the road. Techavin lecha haderech shelo yihu toim. Right? Set up the roads so that people won't get lost. And therefore the goel adam might find him and kill him when he shouldn't be killed. V'loin mishpat moves. So now Moshe Rabbeinu says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, hey, how am I supposed to do it? Amalo hamed lahem istlios mechuvanos la'orei miklat. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, here's an idea. You make like signs, right, that point to the Ir Miklat. right? Uvechol istilis, on each of these signs, Rishom Aleha, right? Rotzeach la'orei miklat, 10 kilometers, right? It says exit second left or something like this. That's tachin l'chaderech. So it's a fascinating medrash. The question that the Tolna Rebbe asked on this medrash is, what is Moshe Rabbeinu asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu? These are dvarim pshutim. It seems like a little kid could figure out, right? In other words, if you don't want people to get lost, if you want them to be able to get to someplace, you put up signs. What do you put on the signs? Directions to the destination. Put an arrow, say Ir Miklat. Why is Moshe Rabbeinu asking this from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So here, this is why the Midrash tied it into this pasuk. Tov v'yashar Hashem al kein yorech hatoim badorach. Hashem is good and just, and He guides even those who sinned along the path. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be the one who guides them. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want these people, so to speak, to be distanced from Hashem because of what they did, and just the municipal authorities are going to set up the signs. He says, I want you, Ribono Shalom, to be the one who says how it's going to be done, who's holding them by the hand at that point and helping them get to where they can get to have kapara, atonement, and to rehabilitate themselves. That's the point of that dusiach, and therefore, what David HaMelech is telling us in Tilim is now any person who lo aleinu ends up as a rotzech b'shogeg, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes him by the hand. Yorech hatoim badorach. He is the one who's guiding him through the road. Now, it seems, right, it certainly fits and explains with the Midrash. It seems a little bit strange to us that Moshe Rabbeinu is, so to speak, prompting HaKadosh Baruch Hu to say something, right? But we find that in other places. In Sefer Shmos, so we have the following. Moshe Rabbeinu, when Hashem tells him to go and redeem Am Yisrael, so he asked, Mi Anochi, who am I, right, that I should take them out? And also he asked, Ki otzias b'nei Yisrael mitzrayim, that I should take them out. Rashi explains, Maru'in Yisrael legeula. How are the Jews worthy of being redeemed, right? What schus do they have to get redeemed? We know that Am Yisrael were not in a great spiritual state. Now, here he asks on this, the Sfas Emes says, Moshe Rabbeinu olav Hashem diber sara al Yisrael? Is Moshe Rabbeinu like putting down Am Yisrael? Is Moshe Rabbeinu prosecuting Am Yisrael? Here HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, take them out of Mitzrayim, they're suffering. These people, what merits do they have that they deserve to come out? That doesn't fit with Moshe Rabbeinu, right? He says that constantly, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who spoke l'tovas Yisrael. He always spoke for the good for Am Yisrael. When we were in trouble, he always went to speak to Hashem. He was Moser Nefesh, right? Speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in ways, almost arguing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lama yomu mitzayim lemor. Why should the Egyptians say you took them out to the desert to die, etc.? He always went to bat. And here he's doing this. So he explains that what he wanted was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should respond to him and tell him with what schus. They're coming out because of their destiny, because of who they will be. When you take them out of Egypt, they're going to come to this mountain and receive the Torah. That's why I'm taking them out. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had his reasons for taking them out, but he wanted HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, to verbalize it, that should become part of the Torah. And that's something which we rely on very much, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at our future selves as well, not just our present self. He looks at the good things which we will do, and he doesn't look at the bad things which we will do in the future. Those don't affect us now. Again, the Sfas Emes in another place brings down the reasoning for that. It's because the person, when he sins, it's when he has a certain form of temporary insanity. Shtus is related, the shin and the sin can interchange to be sotem min haderech. You took a wrong turn. So that's not a representation of who you are. That's who you aren't. The mitzvahs you'll do in the future are who you are. So that was something very important. And here in the notes, in this version of the Sras Emes, they bring from the brother of the Maharal, the Sefer HaChaim, Reb Chaim, the brother of the Maharal. And this, he says it. He says, we find this by Moshe Rabbeinu, right, who said, right, who are Am Yisrael to come out of Mitzrayim? He asked the same question. Chalila lo the roeh nemon, right? It can't be that this loyal shepherd, Shemasar Nafsho Kamapam Mal Yisrael, that he gave his life for Am Yisrael multiple times, Sheyakatre Galeim, that he's going to prosecute them, Loma She'enam Royim Ligoyal, to say that they're not worthy of being saved. Elarotzo Lishmoa Tshuvas Hashem Yisbarach. He wanted to hear HaKadosh Baruch Hu say that. He wanted to say that answer. So I'm bringing that as a parallel to this Midrash which is here. Meaning, just like Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what should I do? What are we going to do if somebody kills in the north of Israel and needs to find an Ir Miklat? He says, you'll prepare the derech. How? How am I going to prepare the derech? You're going to make signs telling him to go there. That we see in Tilm is Yorech HaToim Baderech. That Moshe Rabbeinu connected HaKadosh Baruch Hu to those people in that way. So this leads us to a fascinating source that, again, the Tolna Rebbe found and shared with us. And I've looked it up online and I've printed it out, and it has many, many jewels in here. What it is the following. There was a Rebbe, he was well known in London, the Shotzer Rebbe. Shotzer Rebbe, he came out of New York. He was a Rebbe in London, did a lot for people during the war. And he had a son who learned in the famous Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin in Poland, the yeshiva that was founded by Rav Meir Shapira.
Is the same Shotzer from the Shotzer Matos?
That's the same. Yeah, I believe it's related. In other words, he was in London, but yeah, the family name is Moskowitz, but I believe so. There's actually a famous story with him. I'll just tell you two famous stories about him. One is after the war, so he had come as a refugee to England, so they wanted to get him British citizenship. Now, the way it was described in this story, at least in those days, they would send someone to your house to interview you. They would send some government official to interview you to see if you could become a citizen. And he came, and he quickly discovered the Shotzer Rebbe didn't speak English. So he told whatever family member was there, I'm sorry, you have to explain to the rabbi he can't become a British citizen because he doesn't speak English. So the Rebbe said something in Yiddish. He said, what did he say? He said, he wants me to ask you if a person who's deaf-mute can be a British citizen. And the man said, yes. So he gave him the citizenship. Right? In those days, there was a story during the Blitz. So again, many Jews scattered from London all over the place. He went up to Gateshead, and there were many refugees there, and it was Rosh Hashanah, and the man who was in charge of the bakery, there was one of his assistants, he made big sudas for the refugees, said, there's no challahs for the second day of Yom Tov. We used them all up on the first day. So he came over to the baker, and he said, we're out of challahs, you have to bake challahs. And he said, but, I say up the night of Rosh Hashanah and I say the whole Sefer Tehillim. I said, I'll do that for you. He says, but, I do this. I go to the mikvah, I say Sefer Tehillim again. He said, all that I'll do for you. You just have to hear shofar, Amida, you bake, I'll daven for you. Right? That was one of the stories, again, with him. So his son, who was in Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin, wrote down 3 drushas that he heard from Rav Meir Shapira. We don't have a lot from Rav Meir Shapira. Right, only things, he wrote down a few things in different journals and other things that were collected from his Talmidim, some of the greatest Rabbonim in the previous generation, right, they brought down things from him. But here there are 3 full drushas, including the hesped that he said for the Chofetz Chaim. Right, this was very, very, very interesting. So I'll read this one point that connects to what we're doing here. Maybe if we have time, I'll bring a couple others from it. Rav Meir Shapira said the following. He said, he transcribed it in Hebrew, so I'm sure it was said in Yiddish. He said, Shamati mimenu harbe. Rav Meir Shapira said, I heard a lot from the Chofetz Chaim. He would go to visit the Chofetz Chaim regularly. He had gone to the Chofetz Chaim. Said, Aval roshem hachi chazak. The strongest impression was made on me biyosi etzlo b'Shabbos Kodesh, once when I was with him on Shabbos. Okay, so that means he's saying, I heard many things from the Chofetz Chaim. Out of all those things, what I'm about to tell you is the thing that made the strongest impression on me. He said like this, Amar li oz. The Chofetz Chaim said to me then the following, Moshe Rabbeinu kodem p'tiroso. Moshe Rabbeinu, before he passed away, right, and we're getting to the end of Moshe Rabbeinu's life now in the Chumash, he said, Tikanti avur hakol. I've set up in the Torah ways that everyone can have a tikkun, everyone can repair, everyone can do tshuva. He says, Aval avur otzeach nefesh bishgoga lo dagti klum. But I don't have anything set up to help a person who killed inadvertently. So then, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, right, Bikesh al zel Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem for help, and he was answered, Sheyasa avuram arei miklat. You should set up these cities of refuge. V'kiyam tekef zos b'simcha b'chayav. And Moshe Rabbeinu immediately did this, right? Chazal give this an example of a person who loves mitzvahs because he immediately set up the three in Ever HaYarden, even though they couldn't really be active until Am Yisrael fully rolled in Eretz Yisrael. And he did it with simcha. Also, even knowing that that would be, when he finished that task, that would be the end of his life. That was the last of his missions there. V'achar kach amar holo. But then the Chofetz Chaim continued. He said, Moshe Rabbeinu olav Hashem k'shetiken arei miklat. When Moshe Rabbeinu made the arei miklat, amar la'atzma, Moshe Rabbeinu said to himself, ha'emesh shetikanti avur hashoyeg. It's true, I've made something now that a person who killed inadvertently can have a tikkun. Aval avur hamezid lo tikanti klum. I don't have anything set up for a person who killed intentionally. Okay, now again, there is misas beis din for a person who killed intentionally with the witnesses seeing him and warning him and it going through beis din, etc. But there can be many cases of someone who killed intentionally and we don't have that evidence. Now again, I will point out parenthetically, because once I was learning Sanhedrin with some Talmidim, they kept thinking that everybody can get away with everything, right? Because our laws of witnesses and evidence are so strict, right? You see the man chasing the other one with the knife, right? And then they go around the corner and you see the man there, there's a stab wound, and you see this, but you didn't have the witnesses, you didn't have the warning, you didn't actually see the stabbing, all these things. So Beis Din does have very broad powers if they really feel that a person is a danger to incarcerate him or to punish, or all sorts of other ways. It's not that people can play, fast and free with these strict rules of evidence and get away with every crime. Okay, there is a system for that. But here Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, this Horig B'Mezid, what can we do for him? Now, you have to realize that this is really expressing the approach of all punishments that are in the Torah. Right? I've quoted endlessly Reb Chaim Friedlander, who phrased it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he punishes, it's never revenge, it's only tikkun, it's only repair. We see that there's an aspect of Vahavta l'reacha kamocha. Even with someone who's sentenced to death by Beis Din, in those rare cases, we make sure that it's done in the way that is least shameful, least painful. Other things which are there in terms of the Malkus or other different things, everything is there with a measure, and the goal is to help the person, to free them from that Avera, which is there. So he says, the Shabbos I was there was Parshas Shlach, right, which is, we had the Chet HaMeraglim, and Moshe Rabbeinu davens, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu said the Pasuk, V'nislach l'chol adas b'nei Yisrael, v'lager agor b'socham, ki l'chol ha'am b'shgoga, that the entire community of Am Yisrael will be forgiven, and the ger who lives among them, to the whole nation, it's just a shgoga. It's just a mistake. It's just inadvertent. It's a very strange pasuk. So here the Chofetz Chaim quotes Chazal. I did not find the Chazal. Obviously it's there. It says, Kshem shata soleach leger, kach tislach l'chol b'nei Yisrael. What Chazal said is, just like you forgive the ger, so too forgive all b'nei Yisrael. What does that mean? Said the Chofetz Chaim, Kemo hager shoya esmol nochri v'lo yoda klum me'atorah v'achshav nasi Yehudi. If you have a ger tzedek who was living among the non-Jews, didn't know anything, and now he's become a Jew. Okay, now obviously he's had to learn about Torah and mitzvahs and be makabel mitzvahs, accept upon himself the Torah in order to become a ger tzedek. And the more and more he learns, the better. But it's quite reasonable to assume that there can be some gaps that are missed, right? It says, Im yavar alma, he says, if he will now inadvertently transgress something because he didn't learn that bit yet, chitziya taina alav, is there going to be a complaint against him? Hello, lo yada klum ki arach shavaya ben ha'enu Yehudi. He says, what can we expect? It's not his fault. He was among non-Jews. He's learning, but he didn't get there yet. So he says, Kamochein hui ma'osa avera chas v'shalom. Says the Chofetz Chaim. It's the same thing with a person who does an avera. Kim hoye yedea be'emes godo kedushas Torah kedosha. If this person who did the avera, even b'mezid, if he knew the magnitude of the kedusha of the Torah kedosha, v'godo matan schar shel mitzvahs, and the tremendous reward that there is for mitzvahs, az lo hoya mi ba'olam sheyavar aleim. Nobody in their right mind would ever transgress something in the Torah. Masha ovrim, the fact that a person can intentionally do a sin in the Torah, it's kamo ager she'en mevinim v'yodim bemes klum. It's like that ger tzedek who's missing that bit in his education and just doesn't know about it, right? It's v'zeu kshem shata solech leger ki shogeg tach tislach l'chol b'nei Yisrael. So this, Rav Meir Shapira said, made the greatest impression upon him of anything he heard from the Chofetz Chaim. It parallels what we find Moshe Rabbeinu doing in this Midrash, saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, what's going to happen with this person who killed inadvertently? It says Moshe davened for it, and he was told the mitzvah of Ari Miklot. And he asked Hashem, but how's he going to get there? How's he going to find it, etc. And Rav Meir Shapira says we do see this in the Chofetz Chaim's life, right? That he cared for everyone. And if you look at his Svarim, which are much broader than we imagine, he wrote Svarim of the highest level of, Lamdas on Seder Kodshim, especially he has the Likutei Halachos and all those things, his Mishnah Berurah, but he also has the Sefer Machne Yisrael to guide those Jewish boys who were taken into the Russian army. The Kantonistim, they were called. They were kidnapped, and they were in the Russian army for 20, 30 years sometime. And he wrote a sefer teaching them how to keep the halacha that they can in there. It was just the father of a friend of mine just passed away this past year. His name was Mr. Lothar Kahn. He lived in Chicago most of his life. He was from Germany, and he came to America just before the war, and he was in the Normandy invasion. He fought in the beaches on Normandy. Now, he said before he went to war, he was very involved in the nascent Agudas Yisrael movement in New York. In fact, his first Shabbos, when he came as a refugee, spent in the home of Mike Tress, right, who was a famous activist who helped so much. So he said he was a Yeke. He wasn't originally from Frankfurt, but he did go to the school in Frankfurt before he went. And he said that Rav Breuer, right, from Kaladas Yeshurun, from the Breuer's community in Washington Heights, he had shiurim for those from boys who were going to be going into the U.S. Army to serve in World War II, to give them the halachic guidance. Not easy, right, when you're going out there, but the Torah addresses every situation and tells you how to do the best you can do in each of these situations. So the Chofetz Chaim had that. The Chofetz Chaim had books explaining Taras HaMishpacha, all these different things which were there. And this was his care for each and every person. There's a beautiful story that I saw about the Chofetz Chaim, which was the following. He used to travel around selling his Svarim. Right? Again, he didn't let it be known in the beginning that he was the author of these Svarim, right? The Chofetz Chaim, the Shmiras HaLashon, etc. And he would travel around. So he came to a certain inn. Many Jews kept, achsanias, kretschmas, whatever you called it, kept an inn. And he came there. There was a little dining room, and he saw a man who was there, and he seemed like a very coarse individual. This very big, intimidating-looking fellow who was like eating, right, in this very gluttonous way. And there was a girl who was serving at the tables, and he was like yelling at her and insulting her and abusing her. The Chofetz Chaim got up from his chair and wanted to go over and talk to the man. So the innkeeper saw this about to happen. He said, Rebbe, you do not want to mess with this person. He said, he's been in the Russian army, right? He was taken as a kid. He's been in the Russian army like for 20 years. He's like a wild animal, like any other Russian soldier. He could kill you. So the Chofetz Chaim said, no, I'm going to talk to him. And he came over and he says, I have to tell you, they told me that you were in the Russian army for so long and you retained your Jewish identity, that you know that you're a Jew and you're proud that you're a Jew. He says, I don't have like the merit, to stand here. He says, now that you have that, if you would learn how to be more a Jew, right? Now that you're not in the army, now that you can do it, how much more that would be. And the fellow ended up, talking with him like a child talking to a father. That was, again, the way he looked at the people, the way he saw. The Chofetz Chaim, again, could be very tough. Rav Meir Shapira explains here how he faced down like the Polish government at one point, almost single-handedly, when they wanted to interfere in the curriculum of the yeshivas. Right? He just went out, and he gave this whole speech in Yiddish to the main cabinet member who was there, and the cabinet member said, "You don't need to translate for me," and did it. So this is a picture. Moshe Rabbeinu, Tolna Rebbe explains this concept, what's called Ispashtuse de Moshe b'chol dor v'dor. There's a mystical concept you see in the Zohar Kodesh that the extension of Moshe Rabbeinu is in every generation. So oftentimes that's understood. Every generation has leaders who are like the successors of Moshe Rabbeinu, the continuation of Moshe Rabbeinu. He said that's really an idea that extends through all of Am Yisrael, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu cared for all of Am Yisrael. And that's why here, when in the cusp between Sefer Bamidbar and Dvarim, it finishes off, right? Ela mitzvos hamishpatim, these are the mitzvos and laws, asher tziva Hashem biyad Moshe, that Hashem commanded through the hand of Moshe el b'nei Yisrael, ba'arvos moav yarden yerecho, meaning it was given over to the hands of Moshe to give to Am Yisrael. Arvos Moav and Yarden Yerecho are not good places spiritually. Both Moav, which we saw in Yericho, which we meet later in Sefer Yoshua, were places of great tumah. But Moshe Rabbeinu's hand extends to a Jew, even who's in that place, and teaches him Torah. And there's places in the Gemara where if someone said a good svara, something that made sense, was good, a person would exclaim to him, Moshe Shapir Kamar. Moshe, you said good. And Rashi explains that was something they would do. That means that that's like authentic Moshe Rabbeinu Torah coming out from you, right? Which means there's a bit of Moshe Rabbeinu in all of us, and his hand still guides us. And the key is for us to be his Talmidim. It will be his Talmidim, he'll guide us. Called to.